Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back.
What's up?
Katie, it's good to see you.
It is good to be here. It's been about a month.
It has, yeah. Yeah,
Happy to be back in this hot seat here.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
it's good to see people in the live chat already. As always, guys, just keep the chat nice and cool and calm and collected, and everything will go smoothly. So, Katie, do you want to introduce our guest?
I do. Well, only so smoothly because today, everybody, we are bringing forth one of the OGs of ufology, Mr. Doctor, actually, Alan Greenfield. He was the ufologist of the year in 1972 and 1992. He's written about a billion books about the occult, and he's apparently a rescuer of lost ufologists. Alan, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, I'm always delighted to be on something live. So if I really say something outrageous, you can't take it back.
Well, that's
Oh,
why we
I'm
scheduled you
okay.
for
I'm
live.
okay. I'll drink a little tea. I'll be fine.
Yeah, we'll see about that. So, for people who are not familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about how you got into ufology to begin with. You've been in it for quite some time, and we'd love to hear about what got you into the field.
Decades and decades and decades.
Ages.
I was fortunate enough to get in when all of the first gen ufologists, as I said in one of my books, which one was it? Saucers and Saucers. Plug number one, number one, number one. Uh, Not a book that I'm particularly plugging. Sometimes I amuse even me. But the way I got in was just at a time in my teen years when I was interested in lots of stuff and got involved with lots of clubby things.
Mm.
Call it a adolescent fetish of sorts because that's what it was. I mean, the timing, a Freudian would have a field day with it. I joined the Mystic Arts Book Society, the Science Fiction Book Club, and joined the worst possible UFO group that I could join, which
And which
was
is that?
that was NICAP, the
Ah.
National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena at 1536 Connecticut Avenue, Washington, 6 DC. For old folks like me, they'll know that before there were zip codes,
Mm-hmm.
there were zones.
Oh.
Like I live in the same zone after having traveled all over the world. I'm living in the same zone that I grew up in. So, it's sort of the Mary Celeste story.
But listen, Alan,
uh,
you're sort of best known, I think, for your book, The Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. So I just wondered what inspired you to write the book, and if you could also give us a kind of a brief outline for anyone that's not familiar with it of what it's about.
Okay, how long are we going to be on?
at least 4 or 5 hours.
That's okay. I certainly hope so, because I've got about 4 hours in me, and then being a mature gentleman, I probably will totter off to bed for the rest of the day. But so it is, and so it is. Notice I am wearing a Hawaiian shirt,
Mhm.
which I seem to always wear. And because I'm in a temp apartment, because they're renovating my quarters, putting the padding in and the jacket, all those things, the syringes. Uh, I don't know where much of anything is. But anyway, to your question, um, I got involved because I was interested all of my life. And I mean, literally going back as far as I can remember, and I remember back to two, fascinated with UFOs. I'm unfascinated with UAPs, UAPs, as I like to call them. UAP, UAP, yap, 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 yap. I much prefer UFO. I think We're dancing to the government's tune. So I want to discourage you folks right here at the top before you cut me off. Don't use it, friends. It's playing to their eternal game of build them up and then disillusion them. I've been through that 5 times now in the long history of ufology that I'm in. But anyway, I got in just early enough through the teen ufology movement, as it was then known. Some of us are still active, like Gene Steinberg. I'm sorry, he's a friend of mine, sort of. He's a long time acquaintance. And Rick Hilberg and Dave Halpern, who actually has something on the ball. And if y'all haven't had him on, y'all ought to have him on, because Dave's a real scholar with good credentials, better than mine, actually, because they're in the right field, whereas mine is in left field, far out in the left field.
We like the left field. It's interesting.
Well, that's because I'm a leftist, but that's neither here nor there. I'm an old line leftist, though.
So one of the things that I have been fascinated by with your work, Alan, is the marrying of ufology and the occult community. And I think for folks who haven't watched Hellier, plug Hellier, or haven't read Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts or your other work, could you go a little bit into, you know, the Western mystery tradition and esoteric schools and what the cipher comes from?
Okay. I came to the cipher through a side door, so to speak. I had been since way back when the dinosaurs ruled the earth. I had been both involved in ceremonial magic with a K on the end, as Crowley's affectation has it, and I prefer because it isn't stage prestidigitation. Did I say that right? Prestidigitation. You know, you press the button and the duck comes down and gives you $100. No, that's Groucho Marx. I'm sorry. We get confused out here on the Dead Sea. You can't swim in it, but you can walk on it. Think about that a lot. Think about that, what you're reading, Katie. You can walk on the Dead Sea because it's like 90% salt and 10% water.
I know. I've sat in it and read a book while swimming in it. It's weird.
You can't drown there, even if you want to, even if you're weighed down by stones, which there aren't a lot of in that area. There are. Did you see the wild goats?
No.
Oh, that was something all my life. I read a book in the early 1960s. This isn't going to deal with your question at all, but fuck it.
Go for it.
It was by a Reform rabbi, which happens to be the religion that I follow and have been, you know, I'm a lifelong follower of it. While everybody else I know is into some kind of crazy witchy thing, not to say anybody here. And, you know, I am very cool with those circles because I like weird stuff. It's a pretty oatmeal type religious preference, but on the other hand, it's very inclusive and it's got liberal attitudes towards the supernatural and blah 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 blah. I could go on about that. What did I get to that for? Plugging the temple on Peachtree, where I attend services on rare occasions.
Well, is the temple on Peachtree where the cipher comes from? Come on.
No. You're good at circling back. Oh,
I am. I'm gonna wrap a little rope around you and reel you back to the question. Because I think that your work is criminally missed in the modern ufology movement, and I think it's widely known in the paranormal community, in the occult community, and I think there are a lot of folks here as much as you don't like us disclosure folks, I know, it's okay, that are very interested in keel ideas, valet ideas, whatnot, and are right on the cusp of learning about some of the things you talk about. And I think that you're a great door into that. So
I'm probably the only door of my generation, because back in the day, people would read Keel and still try to interpret it in terms of ye olde extraterrestrial, quote, hypothesis, unquote. It isn't a hypothesis, it's a belief system, like a lot of things that call themselves scientific. But, well, I'll tell you the story of how I got involved, okay? I was already many years in ufology, and at the time, which is circa 1980s, early 90s, somewhere in there, through the complicated world of my, how should I put it, my complex love life. I'll get back to that. Let me drink a little tea here. Which is in one of my books called, what is it called? The Grail Within, you know, like Grail, Cup, Lance, whatever.
We know your sex magic book.
Is that what it is? I thought it was a sort of a parody of, going down the rabbit hole, Alice in Wonderland. Did you know that dude that wrote that was, when he was not writing books for children, he was taking nude pictures of little girls. The Reverend Dodd, I think was his real name, Lewis Carroll. That was, well, in the 1800s, it was not quite the same, but still, yes,
that's what I got.
Still in all, in conclusion, he was a perv. But who am I to call anybody a perv? So where was I going with all this meandering along? Is
entering into the Kabbalah cipher, how you came across that.
Okay, the only reason it overlaps with my storied love life, some of which is in the book. I mean, that took some strain and guts on my part to impart, because it's all the books that deal with sexual magic, other than mine, deal with it from a theoretical standpoint only. Right. And I go into that, but it's basically the secrets that haven't been secret for a very long time. And then the second half of the book is basically about my own experiences with it. And that's, nobody else is doing that, with the possible exception, briefly, of a guy named Lewis Culling, who unfortunately is forgotten to history, but he influenced me a lot. Anyway, so my second wife's second husband, who nevertheless is mostly known by the name Tina, because she was trans for half the time that I knew her. But back when she was still doing the guy thing, as they say, she was one of the chief cooks and bottle washers, and eventually became the outer head of the order qblh, which for reasons that are not self-apparent, unlike many organizations, did not see itself, at least on a local level, as a rival of the OTO, to which, excuse me, I give the scout scout salute.
93. Love and will.
Okay, love, will, and fuck the OTO.
That can be the episode title.
Up the ass with a pine cone. However, just a couple of days ago, my dear friends, the Newkirks, were saying, "Can you guess what occult order Alan Greenfield is?" And they said, he was in the OTO because he uses every opportunity on the air to trash them, which is true. because
If the truth is.
they need a trasher, and I'm glad to fulfill that role. But anyway, my second wife's second husband was a guy that I felt kind of ambiguous about things. They had children together, and then they went through a big thing because she didn't like he was in transition. I remember a famous phone call that we're still on friendly terms as far as I know. She isn't going to shoot me, and I'm not going to shoot her, and that's better than I can say with her successor. But anyway, the story gets really complicated, so hold on to your genitalia. But my third wife, whose name I never mentioned because she was, among other things, a junkie and a thief and a hooker, and there's nothing wrong with being a hooker, but being a junkie, there's something real wrong with that. I know. And the way I found out she was a thief was she was taking our children with her when she was out robbing department stores.
Ooh.
And got caught, and I got a call from security saying, this woman is being arrested and you should come and collect your 2 kids. To which I said somewhat elegantly, say what? I'm out of town, but I did go collect them, but it was a mess. But anyway, she, I was working like a 50, 60-hour week, and she was apparently indulging her then girlfriend and stealing like a mofo, like lots and lots, because she once proudly showed me this list of stores that they had and items that they had taken. The funny thing is, none of that money ever came into my household, so I assume it went to drugs or went to the ring or whatever. So I called my ex-wife, number 2, and I said, my wife told me she's a lesbian and she won't have sex with me anymore. And she said, you think you've got problems? My husband is a woman. I said, okay, you're always fucking topping me. I give up. Okay. But the truth is that by the time they got involved, I decided I liked him than him better than I liked her. So we developed a relationship. I got involved with qblh, even though I was then one of the fair-haired boys of the OTO, if you can believe that actually happened. It did. So, I think that was during the period I was lodge master of ULIS, Lodge number 10, OTO Incorporated. But I won't talk about the OTO because I always do, and I don't like becoming a cliche. Burble. But so qblh brought the cipher based on Liber Alvel Legis, Crowley's magnum opus, if you believe me, or if you believe him, the book that was dictated to him by the Praeter-Human Intelligence, IWAS. Right. There already is your link to ufology and to trans-channeling, which is of the ufology sort, which claims to be from, let's say, non-terrestrial sources. Right. Crowley was astute enough, even in 1904, the year this historically important thing happened. I mean, of course, the birth of my father, not the dictation of Liber Alvel Legis. No. Actually, he was born on the first day of the Cairo working, which was the Thelemic version of, the Moses at Sinai. 15, oops, 10 commandments for the people, Mel Brooks, 81. No, earlier, 71.
Couldn't tell you. Okay, so Crowley's here in Cairo, right? And he basically channels this piece of literature, and within it contains a cipher, correct?
Well, yes, but he could not. In fact, the text itself says that he would never decipher it. He tried.
Right.
In fact, the way they were able to work on it, it was not an American group, qblh or otherwise, that deciphered this. It was Jim Lee's Carol Smith and the recently deceased Jake Straighton Kent, who were centered around the British Journal of Ceremonial Magic, and were a uniquely English occult group that had a better take on things than most of the occult organizations that have the vast majority of their membership over here on this side of the pond. And Lee's did a magical retreat circa 1974 and came out of it with a decoding of this cipher that existed in Liberal that made coherent sense all the way through, right, and was seen as a way to clarify occult stuff. Of course, the magical groups, the major groups in America, decided that that was bullshit because it wasn't coming from them.
Right.
And that it's as simple as that.
Politics always get in the way.
Politics, politics, politics.
But you took the cipher a step further, because you noticed that in a lot of these historical UFO cases, there were weird names, contactee names, things like that, right?
You're moving the story along at a pace that I can't keep up with because I'm old.
I'm sorry. Slow it down then. Slow it down.
Tim, or Tina, as I think for now, but at that time, Tim says, "Hey, Alan, are you acquainted with the NAEQ?" And I said, "Is that some kind of English Kabbalah? Because I've heard other English Kabbalias." And at one time I was the greeter at Euless Lodge back at the beginning, and half the people that came in said they were reincarnations of Aleister Crowley, and the other half said, "I'm the god Horus." And I would say gracefully, go sit over at our meeting table next to the other manifestations of the god Horus. I mean, it was the too many Napoleons in the asylum sort of thing. So
meet your brethren.
Bill Horus and Steve Horus. And so it was a lot of that. I mean, you got sincere people, but mostly you got drug addicts and people looking to get laid. That was de rigueur back in the day in that organization whose name I've now forgotten, thanks to the Newkirks.
Shout out Newkirks.
Oh, always. They have been very, very good to me.
They're good people.
Yes, they are. And also very, very on the beam, in the zone, however you want to put it.
Yes.
And, my hope is, since my generation is fading, what a world, that people in their 30s and 40s are going to take up the banner. And for a long time, I kept expecting it and getting more people who were, doing what ufologists of my generation were doing 50 years ago, literally, and reaching the same non-conclusion, which is no conclusion at all. Just, we believe they are extraterrestrial and they are visiting the Earth. And depending on how liberal, everybody see this, quotes, how liberal they were, they would say, and perhaps some of these landing cases, our boss is getting really mad at me now. I can see it on his face. I'm a person of loving kindness. Here, I will give you the croix de guerre. You are now a knight of the French Empire, for whatever that's worth. Okay. Yeah, I made my publisher a knight, but that's neither here nor there. That's something we do. We make them bishops, we make them knights, we push them off into the ether and let them become whatever they want to become. Because the one thing I learned from that organization, whose name escapes me, is that people need to be who they are, not who the group wishes them to be. So give them the authority. Oh, my fingers are disappearing. What is it?
Into the Dead Sea.
It means I don't own a green screen and I'm too poor to buy one.
Right there with you, buddy.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, when I chose to be a writer rather than a teacher or a rabbi or something with the credentials I had, it was the 70s and all things were ideal in the 70s. Most have forgotten that era because they were way too stoned to remember it. And anyway, it's embarrassing. I wasn't stoned at all. I would watch them take their $100 bill, go out to their cars from the limelight at the Disco Kroger, which is the local equivalent of, what was it called in New York? It was 71, 64. Trump hung out there. All of the beautiful people hung out. What was the name of that club? The Disco, to end all discos, way before your time.
Studio 54?
Yes, bingo! Da, 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 da. The duck will now come down and give you $50.
It was 100 earlier, I believe.
Well, yeah, but the duck varies. You know, it was like $25 on some episodes, but that was just Groucho. You know.
Yeah.
My people have a reputation of stinginess, which is not true, and I am taking all the money that you're paying me to say whatever it is you want me to.
We are paying you quite handsomely to be here.
Yes. The usual fee that most podcasts pay, which is why I like to do podcasts. I used to do television, and they do pay, but then you have to perform like a trained monkey. I mean, quite literally, you know. They said, "Okay, move to your mark and see our hosts." I say, "Mark? That's something from acting, isn't it?" I am not an actor. I have, on more than a few occasions, been a performer of ritual mystery plays, but I am not an actor. And more importantly, this was in New York. More importantly, I'm not a member of the union. So then after this whole thing, this was on, what was it on? Brad Meltzer's Decoded, with the three experts, Mo, Larry, and Curly. Mm-hmm. And they had me do this at the end. I mean, we had sat and talked for a couple hours. They edited my part down to like a minute. But, well, it wasn't quite a minute. It was more like 3 minutes. And then they said, "Okay, but you have to greet us. So go back to the ferry." This was on Liberty Island. "And act like you're getting off the ferry. Move to your mark. Recognize us, and we will meet." And I thought, you fakes. You fucking frauds. Do I do this or do I just walk onto the ferry? But no, they haven't given me cab fare back to my hotel yet. And anyway, they're paying for the hotel bill, and if I piss them off, they probably will stick me with the bill. So I said, okay. So I walk to the mark, look at them and go, "You must be the experts, Mo, Larry, and Curly Joe."
I'm sure they loved that.
They said, "Go for take 2, back to the ferry." So we went through it a number of times. I stopped doing a Hysteria Channel programs after that.
Hysteria Channel. That's a good one.
I'm good at this sort of things. The Odor Temple. Whoops, I'm saying it again.
Ooh, oh no.
Well, it's the only cult I ever belonged to, unless you count the Boy Scouts. And I had a better experience there, and it was less expensive and had all the signs and grips and all of that quasi-Masonic crap that's supposed to help you get to those ultimate degrees where you get whispered in your ear, read the document. There are no rituals at this level, but don't worry, Big Bill is writing some. Oh, yeah, right. The guy that did way too much acid in the 60s. That's okay. So anyway, the future outer head of the QBLH hands me a, unfortunately no longer available as far as I know, and if anybody knows otherwise, let me know, computer program that was extremely sophisticated, because Tina was a computer whiz way beyond almost anybody that you can think of, including the people who became billionaires. The thing is, because of, I'm not going to editorialize about this too much, but because of her insistence on dressing and acting as a woman at that point in her transition, she had to work from home. And she was doing medical programming for the CDC, to give you some idea of the level of competency. But it was one bad thing after another, and her life ended not well. But at that time, she was, very active in QBLH, which I had never even heard of. She introduced me to the Poobah, the well-named, ahead of his time, William Wallace Webb, WWW, who had been one of the co-founders of that way back in 1960, when I was but a pimply-faced lad in high school, doing what pimply-faced lads in high school usually do, and a lot, maybe 5 times a day, but.
Alan.
Katie.
Sir.
Huh?
We don't want to hear about that.
Sure you do. It's all bound
That's
up
the
together.
after show.
Okay, I'll put my pants back on now. Who was that guy on CNN who was jerking off while they were having a conference of the reporters? They kept him off the air for like 6 months after that. He was lonely. It was during COVID. He didn't go blind,
That we know of.
Well, no, they have him back now, and they never mention it. And I guess he doesn't either. And he puts his hands up so that everybody knows. Who knows what people will do or not do. So it was billed to me as a cipher that illuminated occult stuff. Okay. And that was probably during the period that I was beginning to have questions about the group I was in. So I got involved in QBLH simultaneously with my other affiliation, consonant with, since I play by the rules, with my loyalties being to the group that will remain momentarily nameless. And I was not therefore as interested as I would have been a year before. I thought, well, another occult cipher. There are so many, and I'm familiar with Hebrew Kabbalah and to a lesser extent Greek Kabbalah, so I know the principles involved. And I read some of the literature from the British Journal of Ceremonial Magic, which the QBLH by then had. it seemed perfectly valid.
Mhm.
I asked my superiors about it, and my superiors said, "Oh, no, 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 this is not a solution to that." So I asked some more because clearly it was, and clearly they were being, what do they say in psychology, resistant. And I didn't go into it in depth, but the computer program called Lexicon, which Tina had invented using, I guess since she's long gone, I can say, when she was working at the Ford Motor Company in upstate New York, she had access to their mainframe computers. And the lexicon was developed on their mainframe. I once asked her, well, when you made it accessible to home PCs, this is a floppy disk program, which is why you can't find it anymore, I guess. How did you remove it? And said, remove it? It's probably still running there. So, agents of the Ford Motor Company, you've got something running in the background on your machines. Because there are gazillions of alternative ciphers. Now, some of the current people that I respect in this say they're only a limited number because there are a limited number of combinations of the 26 letters of the English alphabet, which is where I think people who try to over-apply Hebrew Kabbalah principles to the English Kabbalah miss out on, because Hebrew is a 22-letter alphabet with no vowels. So a lot of stuff gets lost in translation and always has. But also it makes for an unsmooth transition. And we don't have geniuses like Tina around to rearrange it. We have really good people with using computers to sort of enshrine the use of the cipher against the text of Liberal and come up with really, really interesting items that pertain to whatever number value they have generated from a word or a phrase. So at some point, since I was not enthused, but my other hat was ufology, I decided to try it on some of the strange names of planets and beings that are given out, both in classical contactee lore, well known to people in ufology who don't just simply write the trans-channeling or the contactee movement off, which is still not as many as it should be, although I've seen some change in that direction, at least to understanding that something of significance is involved here, which is something that borderland sciences figured out in 1945 before even the term flying saucer came into being. I decided to try the cipher using lexicon on some of those names. And they were immediately responsive in very, very specific ways. There was a kind of a signal to noise ratio. I mean, there was nonsense stuff that came through, but the probability, and I mean that in the formal sense of probability theory, that the hits were coincidental was smaller than most of the similar things that are found in academic parapsychology that lead many academic parapsychologists to say that the case for psi is overwhelming.
Okay.
So that being the case, I started applying it to what I then called the funny names in ufology. Came a time when I felt that I needed to write a book about it. And I went down to my hometown, rented a trailer, and started writing what became Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts, and then its sequel, which was really part of one book, Secret Rituals of the Men in Black. And Secret Cipher came out. It was quite a hit at the time. Illuminate Press of sainted memory published it, and they were a really conscientious publisher. Ron Bonds was the major mover and shaker there. And he had a good stable of people, Jim Keith, Kerry Thornley, and other fellow really esoteric writers. And I actually even sold the second volume to him. But unavoidably, I've got to talk a little bit about my the Grand Master of the Nameless Order. That would actually be a good name for an order, wouldn't it? The Nameless Order of Antiquity.
Is this a recruitment podcast?
I hope not. If you want to do something with the occult and think you need other people to be around you, join a coven or become, like me, a free illuminist with a bunch of credentials that I generally don't use. But if you want to have some authority, people, it's the big thing. Ask the Pope. Ask King Charles. God save him. Somebody's gotta. And I can give, because I've never been a collector, but I've been around a long time, so I've gotten bishoped. In fact, the guy that ran UFO Hunters, what was his name? Is his name? He's not dead. First thing, they take me over to the Redstone Arsenal to do a program on Nazi UFOs, which is mostly woo-woo. So never turning anything down in those days. I go over there, and the guy who was Jewish looks at me and he said, "How can you be Jewish and a bishop?" I said, "Well, it's like a Masonic title to me. It's not a religious title. I have the same perfectly good religion you have." He said, "Oh, blah, blah, blah." And then, unfortunately, this whole thing was taped during space camp. So we're at the Redstone Arsenal, and he would ask me, essentially, what is the meaning of the Nazi UFOs? And I'd say, "Well, I don't know that." And the kids would be between classes. So I'd say, "I don't know that." What kids do, you know. And I had forgotten the question by then, you know. So he said, "Well, what's the answer?" I said, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because I had no idea what he'd asked me. And then those programs, don't get me started on that. That's my second worst thing. Even the part of the episode that I did ended with a Lufthansa jet carrying me to Germany. I've never been on a Lufthansa jet, and I've never been to Germany, nor do I have any particular desire to go there. I'd be walking around on too many of my relatives. So,
yeah.
Fuck them. I'm sorry. This is a family show. Screw them.
Family adjacent.
But
Vinny, I think a question came in, and much as I want to ask you more questions, Alan.
Yeah, no, let's do it. So Chester, thank you for the $10. Says Dr. Greenfield has mentioned a third volume after Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts and Secret Rituals of the Men in Black. Can he share when he thinks this will come out?
I'll try, but I have to say my general disclaimer, which is the title of, I have a title that I favor, and I'll be glad to give it. It's The Real Black Lodge Exposed. But that may not wind up being the title, and publication date is always up to the publisher, not to me. And I've been given a series of estimates that It's coming real soon. So what was that line in Buckaroo Banzai? When are we returning to our home planet? Real soon. It should be out. But let me say this. The current publisher offered me about 10 years ago republishing Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts and Secret Rituals of the Men in Black under one cover, calling it the complete Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. And it was complete at that point. I had always envisioned a trilogy, but because I had received a lot of flack on the second volume from my then superiors, it was shelved for a long time. I had sold it. I had to buy it back. And I sat on it for years. And finally, when I no longer gave a damn what they thought at the even more exalted than me level, I said, go ahead and publish it. And I think it was published by a publishing house that no longer exists. And I don't know what kind of circulation it had. I know what kind of royalties I didn't get, because I've had good publishers and I've had those that disappear into the ether, which most authors have some experience with, along with pink slips. And so it was published as the complete Secret Cipher, and then Hellier happened. And my good friends at the Planet Weird decided to interview me, principally because apparently the Secret Cipher in the original edition, which somehow they had, which that means they got it on the secondary market, which means they paid a substantial amount of money for, none of which came into my pocket. I mean, once it's in the secondary market, unless you have some special contractual arrangement, you don't get royalties from that. Right. So once something goes out of print, if it's something that ever had any popularity, the price goes up and up and up and up. Several of my books were in the several $100 range, and I've always tried to make my books very accessible to anybody with, essentially with small change. Right. And because that's the way I like to be able to receive books. So this combined edition found a new generation of people, but after Hellier pretty much talked about the Secret Cipher over and over again, and then in season 2 did what amounted to a 4-hour interview with me, and then miracle of miracles, good people were actually at the helm, not just the people in the front, but the people in the camera thing. And
shout out Carl.
Yes, shout out Carl Pfeiffer, my man. And there, I don't know how long the interview was, because I don't watch my own stuff. It's cringe-worthy, but well, that's almost true. I mean, most people don't like to watch themselves doing this, because I do crazy stuff, and I say, that was really silly, Alan, you mo. And it feels good at the time, and then later you question your own sanity and sense of taste, more importantly. So after that, sales of complete Secret Cipher went through the roof, and I'm still with that same publisher. So all I know is what I'm advocating
For anyone
is,
wondering.
yes, there it is. Get it while it's hot. So it won't be complete if this third volume comes out, and it certainly will eventually. I would say sometime in the next few months, but that's just a ballpark. I thought it would be out 6 months now. I thought it would be out early in the year. But my part of it's done. The only thing I have left to do is to read through it. I'm certainly not going to be the proofreader, because my proofreading is atrocious. And electronic proofreading misses all of the technical terms that we use, including the funny names. It doesn't want funny names. It doesn't like names of stars and names of planet Piwam, my favorite planetary name. Yeah, that's the one that...
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. We used that, in fact, for a friend of mine's ex-wife. We say she was visiting from planet Piwam. They had a very, very, very unpleasant divorce. Unpleasant for him.
Ooh,
she loved it.
For her. But so Hellier got your work a lot more attention. I think a lot of people, a new generation of folks came to your work from Hellier.
Yes, and interestingly enough, whereas in American ufology, I have always been a voice crying in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. That is, even though I have, I suppose, a view not unlike Vallet's, his credentials are in hard science, mine are in humanities. So I don't get that, that kind of attention, because what I say is what you hear on various, not present company accepted, from deranged sources on YouTube. It's possible that Trump is Jesus, and here's the proof. Whatever, there are a lot of crazies out there, and they love seeing themselves on TV. I don't, of course. It's simply a duty with me. Teeth. Well, I still have my teeth. Hair. Still got the... It's real.
We believe you.
Well, I had to pull it, though. Otherwise, you wouldn't have believed me.
Vinny, I have like 1,000 Hellier-related questions, but I want to give you a chance to ask some of yours, too.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense to ask, when it comes to your research, both in the occult and in ufology, how do you tie that together? Because I know a lot of people come from like a nuts and bolts background, but then you've got the consciousness aspect. So how do you tie all that in with occultism as well?
I am so glad you asked that question. Look, I don't know anyone of the first gen or second gen ufologists, and that second gen is my generation, that didn't start off not only with ETH as their most probable non-conventional solution, but that in some cases that's where they still are. In American ufology, that's the way it was for the first 30 years that I was involved. The thing is, as the late Jean Duplantier of Saucer Space and Science put it when he put out his last issue, and this is the way a lot of people left ufology, it's like, I've never forgotten the exact phrase, it's like a long walk down an endless tube. Well, I knew the phenomena happened, And I knew that it extended way, way, way beyond lights in the sky. The lights in the sky can be almost anything. You know, it could be, I know this is incredible, but they could be balloons from China. I mean, anything is possible, right?
We don't want to talk about the Chinese balloons.
Well,
no more Chinese balloons, please.
But if you got away from NICAP's mentality, which is they're real, you can see them anywhere, but in effect they were saying, but they don't land. At least APRO, their chief rival back in the day, said, well, they do land, and some of the cases of CE2 and CE3 type cases, close encounter cases, actually happen and are worthy of investigation. And MUFON, which was a latecomer, probably the last of the classical large UFO organizations, originally the Midwest UFO Network, later under the guidance of Walt Andrus and John Schuessler, high-tech type, well, no, middle tech type guys, you know, essentially engineering types. They were very ETH, but their membership was a bit more open to more esoteric explanations, not necessarily anti-ETH, but like that leaves some kind of gaps that we need to examine. In the meantime, I met Vallée once before he got involved with more esoteric explanations. I met him with Jim Moseley and Gene Steinberg and Rick Hilberg on our way to an invited trip to see Ray Palmer, the legendary, more or less, in a sense, has been accused of being the founder of flying saucers, because he was Richard Shaver's original publisher and very eccentric and one of the first publishers of Fate magazine, blah, 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 blah. Ray had invited us up after we had earnest young men that we had gone to 1536 Connecticut Avenue in Washington, which is very near where Klaatu was killed, actually. That's not coincidental. So we went to their office. They saw Steinberg and they said, he has to leave. And I said to the late Richard Dickey Hall, sir, we came as a group. Gene is our friend. If he has to leave, we all have to leave. And he said, well, if that's the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. So we left, went back to our hotel room, and did the obvious thing. We called Ray Palmer and cried our eyes out. And he said, well, come on up to Amherst, Wisconsin. I won't throw you out. So we stopped off in Chicago and met with Dr. Hynek and met with Vallée, who has recounted that meeting but doesn't mention my name anywhere, which is of no importance. The big guy at that meeting was Jim Moseley, because Jim was at that time, he was my idol, and he was also a very famous ufologist in first-gen ufology, along with Gray Barker and other, what I came to call middle ufologists, that is, not contactees and not nuts and bolts science types, but somewhere in between, and mostly actually well-educated people who had some sense of discernment beyond some background in philosophy. I mean, Jim was a Princeton man, I think, and one of my best friends over the long haul. So anyway, where was I going with that? Okay, so other than at that time, Vallée and his wife Janine had written a book which was, I've even forgotten the name of it, Anatomy of a Phenomena, that's it. very conservative, not much different from Kehoe's books or the one bestseller that there has ever been in regular UFO lore. That was Frank Edwards' Flying Saucer Serious Business, which was very influential at the time, made the New York Times bestseller list, blah, blah, blah.
And this is before Passport to Magonia, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Only like a year or two before, but a year or two before. So Passport comes out. I read it and I go, this makes a lot more sense than ETH. It doesn't explain, because the underlying guts of why this happens, he even says at the beginning, I don't write this as a scientist. I write this as, essentially as a ufologist, which I don't believe he's ever called himself, but that's the way I would interpret that. And from that point on, I was an advocate of the notion that there was something fundamentally wrong with ETH. And the only thing I could come up with was, without deep scientific backing, that the anomalous nature of UFOs and a lot of other phenomena, from apparitions, ghosts, hauntings, cryptids especially, fairy lore, which was something that Vallée focused on,
right,
seem to all follow exactly the same pattern, even the same pattern that draws people into being fascinated by it and forming organizations. The Fairy Research Society had the original had the same structure that later UFO organizations had, only it was investigating reports of the Fae, the fairies, the little people, whatever you want to call them, which is a worldwide phenomenon and has been documented for a very long time, going back at least to the 19th century, but certainly the phenomenon goes back to as remote antiquity as you care to go.
right.
So if it follows the same pattern in UFOs and you investigate UFO cases, you find it's the same sort of thing. You begin to think that there must be a convergence at some point. Are these different aspects of the same phenomena? I asked rhetorically of myself, and came out with a little thing called Alternate Horizons newsletter. This was way, way pre-internet. So we would all crank out our little mimeograph newsletters, or since my family was well-to-do, unlike me today, so I was able to get them printed, but with one draft, because I was even then the worst proofreader that ever walked the face of the earth. So they had lots of little embarrassing errors, and unfortunately, a lot of them are up on the internet now. I don't know. If you're around long enough, everything you ever did, every letter you ever wrote, every letter that was ever written to you is plastered somewhere on the internet. And if it's disappeared, it's on the Wayback Machine. So,
Well, you were mentioning something about the contactees, though, and that got me thinking, if you don't mind. You mentioned in Secret Cipher that, prior to some of these ciphers being cracked, sometime in the 70s, we see a lot of UFO flaps, a lot of personal contact with aliens with funny names, or I put aliens in quotes. But that now we're going more towards the transmediumship and individual contact, CE5, that kind of thing. And this got me thinking about the Estes method sessions, which, for folks who aren't familiar, it's basically a digitally assisted version of transmediumship. And two of the folks involved in Hellier actually developed the method, Connor and Carl. And one of the things the Hellier crew jokes about, and I've even experienced this myself, is that once you try to use the Estes method to contact supposed non-human intelligence, whatever you envision that to be, it's almost impossible to get them to shut up. They seem to want to come back repeatedly, or whatever they are. And so I just want to ask, have you ever tried the Estes method? What do you think is going on? Do you think there's anything to that version of contactee relationships?
Well, I think classical mediumship is compromised by the number of fakes, particularly with physical mediumship, but that doesn't mean that it's all fake. The problem is that's a real difficult area to find the signal to noise ratio. Yeah. And back in the days when there was serious parapsychological research into mediumship, mostly done by the Society for Psychical Research and the American equivalent, the ASPR. I was an elected member of the SPR for a while, and they still trudge on. They're still there, but they seem to have a lesser focus on that sort of thing, which is unfortunate because they're founding members, and the first generation after that were expert in a wide variety of fields. And I'll get back to why a wide variety of fields is crucial to having any understanding of these things, if you remind me to get back to that. Okay. Because some people say that I wander, but it's just people saying that. Katie, don't do that to me. I'm a nice guy.
I'm a nice girl.
Despite what they say, I'm a nice guy.
I think you're a very nice guy.
Well,
I like you a lot.
I like me a lot too. But no, actually I don't. Good. But where was I?
Estes,
I was at the
mediumship.
Okay. Yes, I had. I wanted to say that beginning in the 1940s with Borderland Sciences, which is still around, albeit their leadership has changed over and over and over. And there have been good periods and bad periods. But back in the day, it was organized by Meade Lane, who is in the Complete Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts, because he was quite an influence on me. And he began looking into not only the mystery of what he called the guardians, the basically UFOs, which they started looking at in 1945 when they were a new organization, long before the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or APRO, which have been variously claimed to be the first flying saucer groups. They immediately became interested in classical trance channeling, but applied not to the spirits of the dead, but to ascended masters. Unlike most groups that got involved in that, they did not have a basis in William Dudley Pelley's fascist organizations from the 1930s, which have had many derivatives coming up even unto today. So their strain of trance channeling, mostly through the very talented channel Mark Probert, I'm not convinced that their sources were telling the truth. That's an interesting thing. But I am convinced that their sources were sources. It wasn't, stuff they were making up as they went along. Right. And then you come through the period of the Seth material and the raw material. Right. The raw material, I knew the people who generated that. Don Elkins, who was an Eastern Airline pilot by day and a trance channel by night. I've been present when he channeled in my own living room. And Carla Ruckert, who was a good friend of mine. They had no doctrine to go with the trans-channeling stuff that they did. And that's relatively unique. They said, take this stuff for what it's worth. We think it's worth a lot. We can teach anybody to do this. Anybody. And they seem to be not just legit, but ultra legit, and not in it in any sense for the money.
Right.
Come forward in time to what's the name of that hotel?
Stanley
Hotel.
in
Welcome,
Estes, Colorado.
Welcome to the Hotel Colorado. You can find them here. Stanley Kubrick's near. So I made that up just now. I think I'll use it in the future. So why not? Other people have. Look at Dr. Sleep. You're going to sleep. You're going to buy my books. All of them. You don't remember that I just said that. Oh, well, what you were saying was, what about the Estes method? Yes, I do have the devices, and I have tried the Estes method, and I think that it works, but it works in a way a little bit more peculiar than simply skipping from channel to channel. What happens is,
I completely agree.
Yeah, you go through that for a while and you're cut off in a sensory thing. And I've done isolation tanks. I don't know if that's way before your day or if you've heard of them, but that's, there was
I have an appointment next month for one. First time.
So, okay. How are you on claustrophobia?
Not great.
Okay, make sure it's one of those where the door opens from the inside and there's no lock on the outside. Okay? Because once you get in the dark and you're floating, you lose most bodily sensations.
Alan, stop. I'm excited for it.
It's okay. I'll be there with you.
Back to Estes.
Okay, so, well, the point is, it works in the sort of the same way, except it's not a whole body experience. But if you cut yourself off from sight and sound, and then there's the other end of it, that questions are being asked that you can't hear, and you're listening to the, I guess, FM radio skipping through its channels with this little Chinese device, which usually costs $19.95 and comes straight from Shanghai, and it's going 30, 21. At some point, you're no longer hearing those. You think you are, but you're hearing words that are not being said by various radio broadcasters. I always wondered, what do you do if you do that on AM radio stations and there's nothing left on AM but ultra right-wing radio,
You come across really racist.
Yes.
Really racist, non-human intelligence, man.
Yes, well, and we all know about replacement theory. Replace, but you stop hearing it. And my hunch
really
is
do.
the same thing would happen no matter what frequency you're on. Try it with shortwave, I think would be really interesting. Anyway, I found that you start to drift into a paranormal state of consciousness, which is very altered from ordinary consciousness. And then you start to, without knowing it, being responsive to what's being asked of you by an external source. And that's how it becomes responsive. Or if you're doing it alone, if you are recording what you hear by saying it, transmutation. They don't say that on radio ever. They don't know the word. Anything more than 3 syllables, is unlikely.
Yeah.
Transmutation.
I'm glad that's your perspective on it, because that's what I found is when you first start learning how to do it, it is very much just what you're hearing. And then you almost go into this state where it's almost intuitive. and you're, at least for me, getting impressions. And I know that other folks have spontaneously remote viewed while doing it, which I think is fascinating. So do you think a lot of this is just consciousness based then?
I think that the Estes method is a good tool for getting to that place in consciousness, especially for people who have been raised on electronic media. In other words, virtually everyone living now, so unless they're somewhere in the way back of Borneo, and even there, who knows? I mean, I've seen documentaries about the quote primitive people in the upper Amazon, where the chief goes into his hut with his little loincloth and things, and turns on his transceiver to talk to people on the outside about the encroachment by people who are tearing down the Amazon forest and choking the rest of us all to death. So there's technology everywhere, or almost everywhere. And if you're raised in a technological society, like it, hate it, or otherwise, you're going to be responsive to technological assistance for paranormal states. Not necessarily because there are gifted people that don't need any of that. But if you are just plain Joe or Alan, you probably can use that assistance. I mean, well, let's see. I have a brainwave synchronizer right here, so I believe this stuff helps enhance you. But I also think that with Persinger's excessively materialist point of view, nevertheless, he is correct that the electromagnetic field of the Earth affects visionary experiences, to which I would add the very, very temperamental behavior of the sun right now, throwing electromagnetic effects at us all the time, is causing very interesting effects in the population in general. And of course, I don't know of anyone who is collecting that. Now, if you work with the Persinger God helmet, there is a device in the computer programming for it that lets you know what's going on with the invisible EM effects that are going on in the Earth's vicinity. It's like, best be aware of that before you even put the helmet on, because you might be getting natural effects. But Persinger thinks, well, that explains it. It's all in the brain. The brain is the thing. But I think mostly the anatomy of the human brain is a focusing and a damping mechanism. It's not the source of anything. You examine the brain, as is the fad in science since Penfield in the 70s, and mostly since magnetic resonance. Oh, this lights up when you think about gold, therefore this produces gold. Well, it's measuring heat, flow of blood to that area. But if you measured your shoulder when you're doing exercises, it would generate more heat too. So is your shoulder doing your thinking for you? What? I think, therefore I am. Hello, I'm Alan's hand. I mean, much of what, and that brings me to the one point I wanted to get in somewhere on your program about disclosure. Now, this is where they're all going to switch off that don't have an explorer's mentality. To have government disclosure of the truth about UFOs, paranormal phenomena, any of that they may or may not have investigated, you have to have something to disclose, yes? I mean, I think there are things that are secret, but they mostly involve or entirely involve weapon systems that have yet to make their way onto the market, so to speak. And in these troubled times, ask any Ukrainian about that. Don't ask any Russian about that. They'll say, "What troubled times?" I'm going to Saks Fifth Avenue. Only they're now calling it because it's the local version, Saks, having gone back to New York. It is a good thing that those things are secret and developmental. And therefore, I think that chasing disclosure from agencies that are built on and dedicated to nuts and bolts is never going to find any more than private ufologists have, who are nuts and bolts ufologists, which is factoids, but no conclusions. What I would suggest is that the integration of these various elements and some others that we haven't discussed, of paranormal phenomena, UFOs, Estes method, other methods, including those that Wilhelm Reich put forward, notions of different types of beings that are being seen. And because UFO organizations have a penchant for lists, they will ask a witness, "Was it bigger than a donut?" Held at arm's length. That used to be a standard question. You ask a silly question, you get a silly answer. It's an old cliche, but it is very true. So if you're asking the same questions they were asking in the International Flying Saucer Bureau in 1953, you're going to get the same answer, which is, this guy appears to have seen something. This woman appears to have experienced something. And that's as far as it goes. You're not able to go beyond that. But available but not integrated are the other phenomena that have the same characteristics. And that's the first thing that one should do. The second thing is, in my opinion, and this is something 20 years ago I would not have emphasized, you need to integrate the findings and projecting into the future the findings of quantum mechanics.
Right.
Because with quantum mechanics comes not necessarily the correct theory as of now, but projecting outward, you have the many worlds interpretation, you have the interesting stuff that's coming from people like Rupert Sheldrake and other august physicists. And now just beginning, I ran something today on my Twitter feed. I'm on Twitter every day, giving the truth, the light, but not the way. The way is up to you. Whatever that means. The notion that the universe is sort of the Nietzschean thing, that you have eternal return. There's a universe, it expands, it develops a sufficient entropy, it collapses, and then expands again endlessly. Whatever a term like endlessly would mean in a universe where there's no space and there's no time. Those are only constructs after the Big Bang or Big Bangs, or, when I was a kid, Big Bang was not the accepted theory. Dinosaurs were the accepted theory. Don't let them eat you, kid. If you go in the yard and it's a T-Rex, get back in the house and tell them to eat another dinosaur. That was the principle. The counselor said, "Oh, they won't hurt you." He was later eaten, unfortunately. Good guy.
Eaten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. What a shame.
Yeah. No, he was eaten by a Stegosaurus, a purely vegetarian thing who regarded him as something of a veg, you know. But so
Well,
that is my main rant these days. If you integrate the various phenomena and say they have such similar characteristics, they're probably different heads of the same hydra, so to speak. And then integrate that with the most cutting edge physics, which I think may eventually overthrow physics altogether. And I'm certainly not the first person to say that. May overthrow the notion of scientific explanations for reality, period. We may be dealing with something better understood in terms of folklore and mythos in the Joseph Campbell sense, then we're dealing with something that has a rigid scientific explanation. That I can't know at this point, but I would suggest if the next generation integrates these things, they will be able to follow the synchronicities to a much better perspective on all of this stuff.
well,
Amen.
if that isn't a beautiful message to wrap this up on, I don't know what is.
See, they're shutting me up now. They're afraid I'll say
no.
more.
Oh, no,
they're
I'm just
stopping
worried.
me.
I'm just worried about Vinny. I think he's looking at what, 2:30 a.m. for you, bud?
It is. Yeah, I have to be up in a few hours with my daughter as well.
Oh, well, ask me too. Didn't any of your watchers ask any questions?
They did. We had one other question. Carolina Garcia. Are there any new theories or areas of research that you find particularly intriguing or promising?
I think I just answered that question.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's exactly new, but it's new to Enigma research. I don't call myself a ufologist. I have for many years called myself a para-ufologist. And I would love if that term had more agency than it now does, because I think that what we're doing, if we want to really understand this stuff, is that it's para-ufology. Is your shoulder still bothering you? Vinny, let me do a healing on you right now, okay? You want a healing?
Why not?
Is your shoulder still bothering you?
It's not 100%.
It's the most distant healing that I've ever done. But I do distant stuff that works pretty well. And I wanted to say one other thing about, do I get to do a plug at the end of this?
Of course.
Please
Okay.
do.
Okay. But this is not the plug. This is just during the long, dark period when it was just Volley famous and Alan, who the hell is he? Shouting in the wilderness, as it were. On this side of the pond, I was treated as the odd stepchild. Walt Andrus once jumped on me for 1 year I had on a suit, because that was, in those days I owned a suit. And the next year at the MUFON gathering, I had on my full hippie regalia, bell bottoms, my hair down to, well, out to here, because if Jewish people try to grow their hair down like Jimmy Page or something, it goes out. So I call it a Jufro, you know. So there I was in the Jufro and beads and stuff. And Walt looks at me and he said, "You used to be a clean cut guy. What happened to you?" And I smiled and said, "Out of Vietnam now," you know, which puzzled him deeply. But at that same period, which was a long, long period of decades, I have to be careful here. the British ufologists, particularly English ufologists, were always more sympathetic and open to my ideas, and were glad to publish them and commented on them favorably. That would be the big hitters of that period: Flying Saucer Review, and Gordon Crichton and I were pretty tight. Brinsley Trench invited me to dinner. Later, Lord Trench. What was at first the Merseyside UFO Bulletin, which later became Magonia, after presumably Passport was published, the most literate magazine ever in ufology anywhere in the world, was very sympathetic to me, as was the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA. And those were the heavy hitters of those times. And I have eternally been appreciative of that, because it meant that I wasn't just in the wilderness. I was simply in America, okay. Which is sometimes slow to pick up on radically new ideas. And the same is true now. I get more offers to speak from mostly from Northern England for some reason, but and from the Scots. You know, I'm all for the Scottish people. That's been very important for me and has continued to be, although now you have people who grew up integrating the occult, so-called, with ufology. And I think they're the hope of the future. Oh, beautiful for space.
Yeah, before we finish though, Alan, please plug whatever you want to plug.
Yes.
Okay. This is only, hold on, let me take a little of my Irish breakfast tea. No. By the rising of, no, I better not do that when I'm talking about my British friends. Up the Republic, down the bridge. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. One Ireland. Scottish independence. Wales, I don't know. They can't understand what I say. And I certainly don't understand what they say. Too many L's in all their words. And Llewellyn once rejected a book of mine. I don't forget these things. Don't hesitate to buy the complete Secret Cipher, the Ufonauts, even though I said when the new book comes out, it won't be complete, because one of two things will, yes. Ooh, it reflects. And those are Mo, Larry, and Curly again. It's I don't do the covers. I used to like covers and have great title ideas, and they always get batted down by my publishers. But my understanding is when it comes out, which will be soon, I'm not going to put a date on it because I don't know, but soon, the real Black Lodge revealed or exposed will definitely be the long-awaited third volume, and will be a standalone book available from all the usual sellers. You get it from Amazon UK. Used to be the Book Depository, but I hear Amazon bought them and are putting them out of business. I mean, after this month, actually, that they're ceasing to be. And then there's Barnes and Noble and virtually any of the major outlets for fine literature. Sorry. And so it will be a freestanding book. But if my publisher follows my advice, eventually it will have an edition of Complete Secret Cipher, which will contain all three. So now they may not follow my advice. There's not a necessity of that. And I just write them. I don't, have authority over them. But I would like that to be the case, and hopefully it will. So you can, if you buy the current version, it will become a rare volume someday if the third one happens. And if not, you've got those two. And if you get the third volume as a freestanding thing, then you can put it next to the Complete Secret Cipher on your bookshelf and be proud about it. Other books, if you're interested in sexual magic from a point of view that you don't get anywhere else in public anyway, The Grail Within is my book on that subject that was originally printed but not published, only for initiates, and is now available to a greater public. That is, people who are really interested in that. And what else do I have? Saucers and Sorcerers, if you want to know about the good old days in ufology.
Why not?
Well, there's a photo in it of the first National UFO Conference in 1964, which I took, and all of the luminaries of that period are in it. It's a good photo. I've kept it all these years. I think it was originally a Polaroid, and one of my devotees on Twitter said, "How come there are no women in the picture?" And I was thinking,
it's a question I ask now of UFO conferences.
Well, that's my point. There is a dearth of women in most of these fields, and there are a variety of reasons for that, but being exclusionistic is one of those reasons. And I don't know, I did a stint as a lodge master, and we had people of every stripe and hue and point of view, and that ceased after I was the lodge master. It's the right thing to be. It's also the richest way to be able to get ideas from everywhere.
Yeah.
Except we didn't allow Nazis. We beat them up behind the building. But shh. It's probably
that sounds like the right tact to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a dog in that hunt. So
well, listen, Alan, I have popped in the description of this video links to where people can go and buy your books, and also to where they can follow you on Twitter. So any information about the third book when it comes out, people can get the information on it. But I just want to say a massive thank you to you, to Katie, and to everyone watching. It's been a really fun conversation, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you.
Oh, it's been delightful. How long have we been doing this? They've all gone to sleep. What can I say? Wake up, people! Wake up! That's my message. Wake up! Wake up!
Thank you so much, Alan. It's been a pleasure just to kind of integrate some new ideas into our disclosure community, and we appreciate that the education you've given us a bit today, and we hope to hear more from you, and I can't wait to read your new book.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's great endorsement there. Don't forget, Katie said, I didn't say that. I didn't prompt her. Checks in the mail. I didn't prompt her to say that. You're welcome. Plus an extra 10%. Okay.
So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please follow, subscribe, like, and go and follow Alan and buy his books. But until next time, guys, we'll see you soon. Take care. Goodbye.